911, what's the location of the emergency?
Brockley Drive, Delmar, New York.
Okay. Brockley?
Yes.
Yeah, what's the problem?
There's a 55-year-old white male down on the ground. We have a court officer on the scene.
55-year-old male?
Yes. An armed court officer on the scene.
He's on the scene?
Yes.
Okay.
The guy did not show up for work today.
He's unresponsive?
He's unresponsive.
On November 15th, 2004, 52-year-old Peter Porco was found dead at the bottom of the stairs of his Delmar, New York home after having suffered massive head trauma. His wife, Joan Porco, was found in the upstairs bedroom, her skull severely fractured in an attack that destroyed one of her eyes. The Porcos were found by one of Peter's colleagues, who'd come to conduct a wellness check after Peter hadn't come into work that day. What he saw that day will probably haunt his dreams for the rest of his life. Who could have committed such a brutal act? That's what we're going to unpack today as we dive into the case of Peter Porco and the disfigurement of his wife, Joan. Peter and Joan were the sort of people that represented Middle America at the turn of the millennium. Both of them were well-respected professionals, with Peter working as a clerk in the New York State Appellate Division Court and Joan as a children's speech pathologist. They had 2 sons, Jonathan and Christopher, and by all accounts, the Porcos were the picture of a happy family. They were also deeply religious, with Joan practicing so devoutly that she went to church every single day. Both their sons had a knack for academics, with Christopher also showing a certain level of charm that his more introverted older brother somewhat lacked. Their home in Delmar was located in a neighborhood where crime was basically unheard of. That's just the kind of place you can afford when you work such good jobs, and it's safe to say that no one could have expected such a violent attack on the couple in their home. The brutality of the attack is what makes it stand out. As soon as police arrived on the scene, they could tell there was something personal behind the attacks. One of the detectives, knowing that family members are usually prime suspects in cases such as this, asked Joan, who was still barely clinging to life, if a relative had done this to her. Joan managed a weak nod. The detective then asked if this was Jonathan's doing, only for Joan to shake her head. But when he asked about Christopher, the outgoing, popular child, the one that seemed to have no trouble making friends, Joan nodded, indicating that he'd brutalized his parents. If we look deeper into Christopher's background, we'll start to understand how unsurprising it actually is that he did something like this. If anyone looked at Christopher back in those days, they'd see a real charmer. They'd see someone intelligent and sharp, the consummate smooth talker. Only parts of that impression would be true, and not the good parts. Christopher Porco was indeed someone that could talk his way out of anything, or at least he saw himself that way. And yet, he wasn't intelligent so much as cunning, and he wasn't charming so much as manipulative. Porco's moral compass was weak, at best. Many would say that he lacked one entirely. But could he really be responsible for the murder of his own father? First, we must understand Porco's past prior to the incident. It's certainly a checkered one, with countless instances of Porco showing a gross lack of moral judgment. For one thing, Porco was a pathological liar. He came from a solid middle-class background, but this didn't seem to be enough for him. After enrolling at Rochester University in 2001, he tried to reinvent himself as the scion of an incredibly wealthy family. He claimed that his dad owned properties all across the world, from exotic locales like Aruba to the peaceful woodlands of Vermont. What he wanted, more than anything else, was to impress other people. He lived for validation. Indeed, he had a tendency to get violent at times, possibly whenever his social status was questioned. This violent streak wasn't just a one-off either. There were plenty of instances where Porco would get uncontrollably angry, so much that people worried he might hurt him. On one occasion, Porco went so far as to threaten a female classmate, saying that he'd kill her. Another incident saw him try to strangle a fellow student at a party, and he might have committed murder then and there if bystanders hadn't stepped in. Porco's most obvious quality was his sheer laziness and entitlement. It's not like he was dumb. Far from it, actually. If he applied himself, he could have gone far to do great things. Instead, he felt like the world owed him something, and that he shouldn't have to work hard to get what he wants. More than anything else, Porco had a strange detachment from the people around him. One could even say that he could be icy at times. His relationship with his brother was strained at best, and it seemed like he had an almost transactional relationship with his father. Or, to be more accurate, Porco often tried to take financial advantage of his father. But that's something we should get into later. First, we have to cover the chilling calm with which he received the news about the attack.
Hi, my name is Chris Porco. I was just called by the Times-Union saying that my parents were found dead this afternoon. I was wondering if you had any information for me.
Hey, Chris, whereabouts are you?
I'm at school in Rochester, New York.
Okay, you're in Rochester?
Yes.
Okay.
Porco apparently found out about his parents' murder on the news and called into the Delmer police station to inquire about it. His tone seemed like that of someone ordering a pizza. Detached, unemotional, bored even. It's like he just found out about some war breaking out in a far-off land, as if the news didn't really have any effect on him. Some might say that he didn't have any confirmation of the attack just yet, only a news report that he was trying to corroborate. But most people would have been absolutely distraught if there was any chance that their loved ones had come to harm. Porco was eventually able to get in touch with a detective and called him back at the station after experiencing some reception issues.
Hi, I'm calling back Detective, I don't remember his name. I was on the phone with him a minute ago. He told me to call you back.
Okay, your name?
Chris Porco.
Hold on 1 second.
Thank you.
Hey, Chris?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, that's better. I don't have the static anymore. Okay, so now who's bringing you down?
My Uncle John, my mother's brother.
What's his last name?
Balzano. B-A-L-Z-A-N-O.
Okay. Is it just the two of you that are going to be coming down?
As far as I know, yes.
Okay. Now, as far as, when was the last time you said you came down and saw your parents?
About 3 weeks ago. It was on a weekend. I can give you a date. I have to figure it out. I'm not really sure.
Okay, but about 3 weeks ago?
Yeah.
Chris claimed it had been 3 weeks since he'd seen his parents, which meant that it would have been impossible for him to be the culprit. Why then had his mother nodded yes when the detective asked if the attack was his doing? That might have something to do with the fraud Christopher had been repeatedly involved in over the past few years. By the way, I post true crime and new cases here every day, so if that sounds like your kind of thing, please consider subscribing. It helps a lot. As we've mentioned before, Porco liked to be seen as the big man on campus. Of course, this required a massive amount of cash to host parties and generally make himself seem like a cool dude. Each round of drinks he paid for bought him some social capital. Each party he hosted got him in with some fraternity or another. He made gifts to frat brothers to make sure he stayed in their good graces. But where'd all this money come from? At some point in the early 2000s, Porco started stealing from his parents. Police investigations revealed that the Porco home had been broken into previously, but at least 2 of these instances were Christopher's doing. While he was home for Thanksgiving in 2002, Porco staged a break-in at his family's residence. This involved cutting into a window screen and stealing 2 laptops belonging to his parents, which he later sold. When his parents bought replacement laptops, Porco staged yet another break-in, using the proceeds to fund his lavish university lifestyle. According to the man who would later try to prosecute Porco, this staged break-in was consistent with what police found on the day of Peter Porco's murder.
So the earlier investigation where Jones' laptop was stolen, one of the screen windows, the screen was cut, okay, and the police thought that that was the means of entry to the burglar who stole Jones' laptop. In investigating the murder, the screen in the garage window was cut, okay? So there was like a commonality. Like if this was an intruder, you know, we've got the cut screen when an intruder got in one point in Thanksgiving, I think it was.
That's right.
The year before. And then the cut screen in the garage at the time of the homicide.
Though his parents reported the break-ins to the police, they weren't able to find evidence of any wrongdoing. This essentially fueled Porco's notion that he could do whatever he wanted without having to face any consequences. Of course, he couldn't fund his lifestyle through petty theft alone. He also had a part-time job at a veterinary clinic. But this turned out to be just another notch Porco added to his burglary belt. The clinic opened up one day to find several electronics and other valuables missing. Porco sold them all on eBay and was never caught for his actions. When he ran out of things to steal, Porco turned to online scams. He'd put items up on eBay, and when they were sold, he'd call the buyer pretending to be his brother and claim that Christopher Porco was dead. E-commerce was still in its early stages, and so people had very few options to verify what happened or even to recoup their money. All in all, Porco was able to maintain an impressive cash flow throughout much of his university tenure. He was able to maintain the appearance of being an upper-class socialite and partied harder than possibly anyone else at college. But that also meant that he had very little time to do any actual studying. In 2003, Porco was expelled from Rochester University due to his poor grades. His parents were disappointed, but they still wanted to support their son, so they helped him enroll at Hudson Community College and came up with a plan to get him back on track. Unfortunately, there was just no helping Christopher Porco. He continued skipping classes and ended the semester with absolutely terrible grades. In March of 2004, Porco claimed that he'd been working real hard and deserved a break, and successfully convinced his parents to pay for a trip to London. During this trip, Porco received an email from his mother with the subject line, "Failing grades, you did it again." In this email, Joan talked about how her son needed to explain himself after failing his classes at community college. Porco responded to this by saying that there'd simply been a mix-up and that the lowest grade he got was a B. He claimed that there was nothing to worry about and that he'd be back at Rochester in no time. This involved even more forgery from Porco. He created fake transcripts that showed him getting A's and B's across the board and showed them to his parents. These forgeries were so accurate that they even allowed him to get back into Rochester, but there was still the matter of paying his tuition. Now, Porco claimed that a professor had misplaced his final exam, which had made his final grade seem much lower than it actually was. He also said that the university was waiving his semester fee due to this mishap. But since nothing of the sort had happened, Porco decided to apply for a loan under his father's name. His dad knew about the loan, but he thought his son just needed $2,000 for some textbooks. Imagine his surprise when he found out that the loan was actually for a whopping $31,000. And that's not all. Porco had apparently used his father's financial information to secure an additional loan of $16,000 just for his personal use. And what did Porco do with all this money? While he did pay his university tuition, the amount he'd received was way more than what he needed, and he used the excess cash to buy himself a yellow Jeep Wrangler. Once Peter found out about this, he sent a furious email to his son threatening legal action. Loans of this amount under Peter's name would affect his credit rating and just cause a lot of other problems besides. Joan sent an email as well, though this one expressed concern for her son's mental state and told him that she still loved him despite how disappointed she was. Porco ignored both emails. He knew that something needed to be done. The mask was fully off, and Porco felt it was time for some drastic measures. Police reports and later investigations paint a pretty clear picture of what Porco did on November 15th. He left college at around 10:36 the previous night, which can be proven by the tolls he paid along the way. He made the 200-mile drive to his parents' residence, and he arrived at around 2 a.m. At 2:14, he disabled the alarm after using his key to unlock the front door. He then picks up an axe from the garage, goes up to his parents' bedroom, and starts hacking away at him. Peter was struck 16 times in the head with blows so severe that they cracked straight through his skull. Joan had defensive wounds indicating that she'd been awake during the attack. Both Peter and Joan were found with their jaws partially detached by the attack, with the blows severing the ligaments and tendons holding them together. One of Joan's eyes was also split in half, with the other being slightly damaged as well. Over the next 2 hours, Porco cleaned himself up and tried to make the attack seem like a random break-in. He smashed the alarm system and cut the phone lines, although the alarm system records had already registered him putting the code in hours prior. Shortly after 5 a.m., Porco's yellow Jeep was seen driving towards his university, and at 8:30, he was spotted jogging on campus. It's likely that he'd gone for a jog so that he could have an alibi for later. Back at Peter and Joan's residence, their bodies lay covered in blood and gore on their beds. But the absolutely shocking thing was that neither of them were dead yet. Joan was barely conscious, but when Peter's alarm rang, he actually got up and turned it off. It seemed like he still retained some basic motor functions and followed his morning routine as if nothing happened. Blood and brain matter was found in the bathroom, indicating that Peter had gone there and possibly even seen himself in the mirror. But his damaged brain couldn't register what it was looking at. Peter even tried to clean the blood that dripped into the sink, unaware of what it was or where it came from. He then went on to prepare lunch and even tried to load the dishwasher. In a heartbreaking show of his continued affection for his son, he even wrote a check out to Christopher, possibly because supporting his son was always at the forefront of his mind. Eventually, the massive blood loss took its toll, and Peter collapsed at the foot of the stairs. His colleague later phoned the incident in, and an investigation ensued. All the while, Christopher Porco waited at college, assuming that he'd once again gotten away with it. Porco clearly thought that he was too smart for the police, but they were able to track his movements through CCTV footage. He claimed that he'd been asleep on the dorm room couch that night, but it turned out that a group of students had been there, effectively canceling out his alibi.
We were lucky enough that Chris told that same story to everybody, not just the police. He told it to his uncle when his uncle came to pick him up. I slept in the lounge all night. He told it to all his friends. He repeatedly told people at the hospital, where were you, Chris? I was at school. I was sleeping in the lounge all night. And while Chris was being interviewed, there were Bethlehem police at the school interviewing people in the dorm who all said, unluckily for Chris, they all, for some reason that Sunday night, sat up watching a movie in the lounge, a whole group of kids. Shrek 2, I remember the name of the movie. And they all said, Porco wasn't here. Porco was not in the lounge.
He had given up his bed right to his fraternity president who was visiting.
No one saw Porco in the dorm lounge that night, even though a huge group of students had been watching a movie there. This wasn't the only piece of circumstantial evidence against Porco either. His car had been spotted going to and from his parents' residence. The security log indicated that whoever entered the home knew the passcode. And there was also the fact that Porco would have received $1.1 million from his parents' insurance payout. When police gathered evidence, Joan woke up at the hospital and didn't look anything like her former self. But she was alive and looked surprisingly good for someone that had nearly been butchered with an axe. The most surprising thing of all was that she recanted her accusation against her son. She claimed to have no memory of what happened and said that her son would never harm her. A year after Peter's murder, Christopher was arrested and charged with second-degree homicide and attempted murder. His bail was set at $250,000, which was mostly paid by his mother. While he was out on bail, Joan even threw him a birthday party to show her support for him. When it came time for him to go to court, she was right there with him, her arm in his, still refusing to believe that her son was the one that attacked her. The jury eventually disregarded her implication of her son, because she may have been too traumatized to fully understand what had happened. Despite this, the rest of the evidence was more than enough.
Porco, count 1, murder in the second degree. What's your verdict? Guilty.
Porco was sentenced to 50 years for each count, and he'll be eligible for parole in 2052, by which point he'll be 69 years old. Porco maintains his innocence to this day.
I'll ask you the obvious question again, Chris. Did you do this crime?
I didn't. I had nothing to do with this. I've said that from day one, and it's the truth.
So what do you think of this case? How does Christopher Porco's story make you feel about trust and betrayal within families? What are your thoughts on the motives, evidence, and the devastating impact on those involved? We'd love to hear your perspective in the comments below. If you like the way we create these videos and want to help bring more cases like this to light, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives. Thank you once again for watching.